Hi everybody and welcome. My name is Angela Kanu and I'm an emotional wellbeing coach, and today I wanted to focus on emotional literacy. On my website, on my blog, and when I talk to other people, I talk a lot about emotional literacy and emotional landscapes. And I'm not sure I ever quite describe what I mean by that. The term emotional literacy actually came from a psychotherapist called Claude Steiner. And the building blocks of emotional literacy are understanding your emotions, listening to others, our ability to empathize with others, and to kind of have some kind of emotional interaction. So being able to express your emotions interactively, so with others. Why is this even important? Because it is the bedrock and foundation of our survival, and also it impacts the quality of our lives. If you think about all your significant relationships, whether it's parental or colleagues or intimate relationships, they can have a severe impact on our day, let alone our lives. So that's why I talk about emotional literacy a lot, and I do. So we also know the term emotional intelligence. So what's the difference between emotional intelligence and emotional literacy? Because sometimes they're used like interchangeably, and there's a good reason for it. Whilst I've talked about the building blocks of emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, there is a slight difference to it. So emotional intelligence involves self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy. So you can see the bridge there, right? And actually emotional intelligence uses the building blocks of emotional literacy, and that's why they're kind of interchangeable, but they're not exactly the same. Well, why am I even talking about emotional literacy anyway? So we're going to take a little sidestep. I genuinely and passionately believe that the idea that our lives and how we interact with each other is about survival of the fittest. I think that era is coming to an end. And no longer is it the survival of the fittest, it is the survival of the nurtured. And what I'm finding in my coaching practice is that it actually doesn't matter when you begin to start the nurturing. It can obviously be a lot more difficult as an adult to do that, but it all culminates in the same better quality of life. And so I believe that our futures as human beings are going to rely more and more on our emotional literacy and our emotional intelligence. And that's why, the whole idea of, this very kind of competitive, kind of survivalist, dog eat dog, hierarchical kind of structures, I think are probably coming to an end, or we're certainly exploring and looking at actually, is this the way that we're meant to be as human beings, and who tells us that we have to kind of compete and use logic and ignore our intuition, and to ignore what we might dream or what we might feel to do. And so I think we're changing from a much more science is everything, logic, you can only believe what you can see right in front of you. I think we're going into a different era. I think we're going into an area that's a lot more nuanced, where we're going to need to be able to use and understand and build emotional literacy and emotional intelligence. The richness of life is not always in the things that we possess. The richness in life can be found in our relationships and the richness of our relationships with one another. How we are able to grow, how we're able to listen to our intuition without judging other people, without judging, the decisions that other people feel that they need to make. Yeah. I hope this is ringing any bells, and if it does, I would love for you to comment. I would love for you to like, and I want you to follow, because I'm going to be dropping some nuggets. You don't get to my age without having, understood a few things about life. And that's what I'm here to share in my coaching business. And that's what I'm wanting to share here on YouTube. So I've talked about the origins of emotional literacy. I've talked a little bit about why, because it improves the quality of our lives. And also, I believe that we're going into a new era where we're not so reliant on knowledge and of logic and science, and actually we're going much into a intuition. What is your gut intuition saying, if you can hear it? And how do you train yourself to hear your intuition as opposed to some of the critical voices that sometimes we may be responding to? And by critical voices, I don't mean you're hearing voices, but there's an internal dialogue that we always have. It's almost a point of reflection for us, for some of us as human beings, where we, take time to reflect and we think and we try to, pull the jigsaw pieces together to make sure that we're kind of making the right picture. So we've talked about the difference between emotional literacy and emotional intelligence. And now I'm going to talk about, what are some of the barriers to us developing emotional literacy? And some of those barriers are just super obvious. There's no rocket science here. So some of it can actually be about our temperament. Because obviously we're talking about understanding your emotions, listening to others, empathizing with others, and being able to express our emotions productively. And so sometimes some of our temperament sometimes might be a barrier, could actually be a challenge to wanting to do all of those things. And also, one thing I know about attachment theory is if you have an avoidant attachment style, this is going to be quite complicated. But someone with an anxious attachment style, this is going to be the bread and butter of your life, of your life, basically, of empathizing, of trying to, collaborate. And some of these attachment styles are very gendered, because another challenge to our emotional literacy is the communities and the societies that we grow up in, the values that we are given. And a lot of those are gendered. They are based on race and based on class, ableism, sexual orientation or fluidity. And so it's not really straightforward. So there are lots of influences vying for our attention. So we've got science, we've got logic, we've got our norms, our values, and how gendered or how biased they are towards us because of how we present. And so our upbringing, and not just the values, but what we have observed. if as children we don't get the messaging and we don't get the modeling that it's actually okay to collaborate, it's okay to understand and to empathize, but also to understand yourself, and actually be real and not do a fake it till you make it kind of thing, which is just not real. It's not authentic and it's not real, but I could see in some circumstances it could be really helpful to practice courage and to practice seeing yourself in a different light. So our upbringings, our values that we're given, but also what we see and what we observe, and the messaging and what we take as children, what that means. Also, our communities. We are, society by nature wants, order. And so there are ways in which, our communities try to keep everybody in line. And again, it's cultural values, it's cultural norms, it's, who's in and who's out. You could say that in terms of like race, the whole idea around the hierarchy of white supremacy. That whole idea is about trying to control a narrative, trying to ensure that people stay where certain people think other people should be based on what they look like or what their socioeconomics are. And also economics. So if we economics with a small c, if we think about the way in which we are taught to work, the workplace, those kind of values, in the workplace you are meant to adhere to a certain set of rules, behave in a certain way, and some ways of working are just not about emotional literacy. You're not encouraged to bring that into the workplace, dependent on what you do and what industry you're in, and also in terms of politics. So again, we're talking about gender, we're talking about race, we're talking about class, ableism, and we're talking about sexual fluidity and orientation and identification. Of our authentic concept of like the emotions that we really have, and like not trying to hide who we are and how we feel, regardless of whether that's judged as good and bad. But there are lots of things, and I as an emotional well-being coach, what I'm beginning to see in my practice is that it is hard to begin to take that journey within. And I don't mean that in a woo-woo kind of way. I mean to really understand who you are, your relationship to your emotions. And I suppose my big question always is, like, who teaches us about emotion? Who's taught you about your emotions, about emotional regulation, about, your own level of emotional literacy or intelligence? I think 9 times out of 10, most people don't have that type of training, where our cultures don't necessarily value or provide that information. I mean, I don't know what, if I would have asked my parents about emotional literacy or intelligence, or I don't know what I would have received, to be honest. And that's because we are in a different time. We're in a different time and space. And think about it. How did you learn about emotions? Not just emotions, but the connection between your emotions, your body, and your feelings. And trying to hold that for other people. Trying to really understand where people are coming from. That doesn't mean that you then take on what their issues are, but just empathizing. And I don't know in which arena we're taught to do that. I mean, as kids, we're told to share and all of that because it's easier to say share. as opposed to children really understanding that when you can understand somebody else, sometimes our relationships are easier. We don't have to become them and they don't have to become us, but we understand where they're coming from. And so we can depersonalize what people are doing. And so it's easier to regulate your own emotion because you know the center from where you're coming from, and you have an idea about where that person may be coming from as well. Obviously, you need to ask questions because sometimes as human beings we think we know something and we actually don't. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. And I suppose my question to you as a viewer, as someone on this channel, and hi, welcome, thank you, follow, share, like, how did you learn about your emotions? And I don't mean feelings, I mean emotions. Yeah. So that's what I have for you today. And if you are interested further in emotional well-being coaching, have a look at my comment section, have a look at my website, follow me and subscribe here. Okay, so hasta luego.